5. Luke chapter 10, verses 25 through 37. The Good Samaritan, something we've learned from the ages as little children. You remember those arch books, right? Why do they call them the arch books? Did anybody know this? Why do they call them the arch books? These little children's books that's got these stories of the parables and biblical stories, they call them the arch books. Nobody knows? Our publishing house is in what city?
St. Louis.
And what is located in St. Louis? The Arch. That was so simple. I guess I'm not going to have you on my partner for Jeopardy. Luke chapter 10. Parable of the Good Samaritan. On what occasion an expert in the law, expert, should know what he's talking about, in the law stood up to test Jesus. Teacher, he asked, what must I do to inherit eternal life? There's a lot of stuff to unpack just in that one verse before we get into the parable. Number one, he's a teacher of the law, so he should probably know the answer to the question. So why is he asking it?
Yes.
Testing. There's the key verb there. He's doing this to test Jesus. So what's the point? The popularity of Jesus is beginning to decrease. And these guys are looking for something that he will say that can be used against him. So they're always, at the end of his 3-year ministry, trying to give him some challenging questions in which they can use against him. All right, here's your trivia for today. What were the things that Jesus said that they used against him in the trial week? What were the things? Can you remember?
Equal to God.
He said he was making him equal to God. He said that, something like that.
Blasphemy.
He committed blasphemy, saying he was equal to God. What did he say about the temple? 3 days, and of course you don't talk about the temple, smack on the temple, that's the holy ground. Jesus says for destruction, so they use that phrase against him from John chapter 2. And he also said he was a king. Remember, they used that he says he's the king and we only have one king, and that's Caesar. So they're constantly bringing questions to Jesus and at the same time writing notes to use against him when a good opportunity arises. The question is, what must I do to inherit eternal life? What's the problem with that question?
That's what I must do.
Okay. What else is there? How many of you guys inherit things? I mean, what do you guys? Do you guys have to work to inherit things, or do you just get it because of birth? Birth.
Sometimes you have to work for it. It's not part of your family.
Well, you get it by birth and you lose it by what you do. You can lose it by what you do, but you really can never kind of gain it. You can gain yourself into someone's trust, they do, because they don't like their family and their children. But if everything is just good, you don't do anything to inherit, right? It's just a gift. And I kind of find this fascinating that the lawyer himself puts out a question that contradicts itself. Communicates a message that he must do something to inherit, but in actuality, inheritance is just something given by by birthright. Jesus responds now, well, what's written in the law, I always like that about Jesus. So when they ask him a question, what does Jesus usually like to do? Ask a question back.
That's a good lawyer thing.
That's a good lawyer thing. What is written in the law? How do you read it? In other words, even though Jesus is omniscient and he knows where this lawyer's coming from, why do you think Jesus has this guy verbalize it? Why does Jesus have this guy verbalize? Jesus knows what's going on in his head. He's mental telepathic. He's omniscient. He knows everything. He doesn't need to ask the question. But he asks the question so it becomes verbalized and therefore others will hear it, the witness and testimony will happen, and they will know what his intent is and how he's understanding the law. So they can't really accuse Jesus of coming at this guy in a wrong angle. So everyone is kind of in earshot here that's listening and understanding how the table of the debate is being set. Well, he answered very well, verse 27, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. So there's two tables there. Love God, love neighbor. And if you were to break the 10 commandments down, what commandments would be involved of the 10 that deals with love God? Verse 3. And the second set of 7 deal with love for your neighbor. What does St. Paul basically say that is the summary of the law? What's one word? Love. Love is a summary of the law. You know, if you are loving, you can't miss. It's when you become selfish that you begin to miss. But if you truly love, you're going to make decisions in accordance with God's will. Because another verse in Scripture says, God is love. So if you love God, a divine like, you are doing what God's will is. Love the Lord your God, love your neighbor. Jesus tells him, you get an A. You've answered correctly. Do this and you'll live. So just get out of here. Yeah.
Did he say that man had a way to work his way up, or he knew that man, including that guy, could never uphold it?
Who, Jesus?
Yeah, Jesus says, if you do this, you'll live.
Yeah, he was telling them the truth, because that's what God says. If you do these commandments, you will live. And what does the guy have to realize? He can't do it. But he's not going to acknowledge that right now. Jesus tells him, I'm not going to argue with you. I know where you're going. You're just trying to set up a trap. But I'm going to, get you to my point as we have this discussion. But I'm first going to tell you that, why are you asking me this question? You know the answers. You already gave it to me. Then, yeah, just go do this and you will live. It's all in the Old Testament. It's there. God says if you fulfill the law, you will have life.
This is really good. This is dispute resolution 101, or dealing with a confrontational person, is to acknowledge that. So
Acknowledge the grounds, and then bring it back to them. Yeah, that has so much to do with what's called interpersonal communication, even in marriage. That when you have this argument between a husband and a wife or whatever, and I counsel this, is before you say anything in argument back to the spouse, you need to make sure you restate what the spouse said to you. That way the spouse understands that you have comprehended what they've said. But if you just constantly go without trying to set this basis of a table for discussion, you will not have anything to really move further on. So you've got to come to say, we understand each other. And that's what Jesus says. I understand what you're saying. You understood. You're right. Go ahead. On your way. But the lawyer is trapped. And he doesn't want to say that, well, I can't fulfill the law. So what does he ask? What question does he ask?
Who's my neighbor?
Who's my neighbor? Why does he ask that question? Where does he feel weak at?
Maybe in relationships with people outside.
Yeah, he doesn't seem to really be concerned about his relationship with God, because it's very clear, I, the Lord your God, and hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one. The great Shema, Deuteronomy 6. He seems to really have a grip on who God is, but he wants to know who his neighbor is. If I were to figure this out about loving my neighbor, I got to first of all define my neighbor. How would you answer that question? Now, before you read the rest of the story, if you didn't even have the Good Samaritan before you, how would you answer that question? Who's your neighbor?
everybody in the world.
Oh, come on, now you're being too Christian. Let's be realistic about our sinful nature. How would you answer that question if, who is your neighbor? How would you answer that? Someone next door. Huh? Okay, getting closer. We got next door people around, but the people whom the people you like, right? There's a difference between a neighbor and an enemy, right? Neighbor is hopefully someone you confront that is a friend that you like to hang around with, bum around, got same interest, and an enemy is nothing you want to do anything with. So in this question, what has Jesus tried to do to broaden his understanding of what a neighbor is? Who does he use in this story to be the hero? And who is this guy asking the question? What race? Jewish. Who is the hero in the story? Okay, now the guy's got some thinking to do, right? He's got some serious thinking to do. These Samaritans, they're hated and despised, and you're telling me they're my neighbors? I've asked this question before, and I think maybe some of you can remember it. What is the cause of this systematic racism against the Samaritans? Why were the Jews being taught to hate the Samaritans? Assyria conquered the north. There are 10 tribes that go into Assyria. They get their blood all mixed up with other people Assyria has conquered. So therefore, the southern kingdoms, the tribe of Judah and Benjamin, are Simeon kind of mixed in there, gets conquered by Babylon. They keep their genetics pure. So when these people come in, they look at them as half-breeds. They don't look them like full Jewish, and if you're not full Jewish, you don't have full Jewish rights. Think about that in Israel today. Do you have to be Jewish in order to own land in Israel? Do you have to be Jewish to own land in Israel? Yes, you do. Yes, you do. They will not allow you to buy land as a Gentile. That's because they cannot give it to Gentiles. Think about the promise.
How do they determine that? Is it citizenship or is it?
Conversion. They will take people who are converted to the Jewish faith. Yeah. So if you're going to, because if you're Jewish by blood but not Jewish by faith, will they allow you to have land in Israel? No. Like Jews for Jesus, they want to go out and say, Jews for Jesus, I'm Jewish, I got blood of Abraham in me, so I should be able to have land in Israel. But they'll say, no, Judaism is more than just being born of the flesh of Abraham, it's also being circumcised and holding to the Mosaic laws.
What if they leave? Do they lose any land?
That I would not know, but I would think they would. Yeah, I think they probably would forfeit their land if they were to forfeit their Judaic faith. Yeah. So systematic racism is taught against the Gentiles because we're not God's chosen people. Can a Gentile become Jew? Yes, they can. Yes, they can. And if you become Jewish, then you get all the rights and privileges of the Jewish faith. Here, Samaritans do not have Jewish rights because they are not part of the Jewish faith. They're half-breeds. And there were two other things that the Samaritans would do that just really upset the Jews. First of all, back when the people of Judah come back from the captivity in Babylon, they want to rebuild the temple. And as they're rebuilding the temple and the walls of Jerusalem, the Samaritans who are already living in the land says, hey, can we help? And the Jews say, no, we don't need your kind here. And they send them away. Well, the Samaritans are upset and offended, so they write the people back in Babylon, who are now the Persians and Medes in control, and said, check the history of these Jews. They're very rebellious people. And if you allow them to build a temple, they will rally around that temple and just create havoc and trouble in the country. So when the Persian and Medes ruler got this letter from the Samaritans, what did you think they did to the building of the temple? They stopped it. They put a halt on it. And when they put a halt on it, they said, we need to investigate this. So you guys got to stop. And they put a stop on it for a lot of years. So they're upset for the Samaritans for ratting them out. And then the third thing is the Samaritans, since they're half Jews and half Gentiles, they would always side with whichever was advantage. So if the Jews were having great things happen, they would say they're Jewish. If the Gentiles were doing better, they would argue they're Gentiles. So there was three things that just upset the people born of Abraham about the Samaritans, and it was a conflict for years between the Samaritans and the Jews. Looking at this conflict and recognizing this now, in John chapter 4, verse 9, we are told that a Samaritan woman knew Jesus was a Jew. How did she know this before Jesus even said anything? His clothes. His clothes. The Jews wore a different set of clothes than the Samaritans. So she could tell just by what he was wearing that he was Jewish. And then, of course, his accent gives him away as well, his dialect. So how does this answer the question as we look at the story of the Good Samaritan now, why the priest turns away? Let's look. So verse 29, he wanted to justify himself. So who's my neighbor? You know, I want to make myself right. And apparently, in order to make myself right, I need this definition of who my neighbor is. And so, in reply, Jesus said, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he was attacked by robbers. Notice that it says he's going down. What does that mean? Well, how do we use the word, oh, I'm going down to Austin, Texas today, versus how it was being used back then? Going south. We think of north-south kind of stuff, right? Going up north, going down south. But actually, in this language here, they're talking about elevation. Yeah, elevation. So which is higher, Jerusalem or Jericho? Was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho. Yeah, Jerusalem's on a higher level and Jericho's down in the valley. I don't know if you've been to that promised land, it's a rugged journey from Jericho to Jerusalem. The elevation just drops. It's amazing, the geography of how fast things can change in that country. So yes, it's talking elevation. It's either up or down, but it's not north and south. It's talking height and depths. So the man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he was attacked by robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. So the priest, first one to come, happened to be going down the same road. A lot of the priests lived in Jericho. Now this is a parable, but Jesus uses many common ordinary things in order for his stories. Why would he do this? Why does he like to use ordinary experiences in life? Yeah, it's just very relatable. Many of the priests live in Jericho, and the priests will go to Jerusalem to do the sacrifices. This all makes sense. So they don't live in Jerusalem, they live in Jericho. So the guy has got his religious duties done. He is coming back home, and he's heading down to Jericho. And a priest happened to be going down the same road. When he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. Two reasons why this priest passed by the other side. One of them is because I brought you back into John 4. What was one reason why he passed this guy by? So uncleanliness was one of them. He didn't, if he's unclean, it means I can't go do temple duty again for a week or so. I don't want that to happen. It kind of tells you a little bit about that he's more into sacrifice than mercy.
Didn't know what his ethnicity was.
He did not know his ethnicity. Why, John, did he not know his ethnicity? He was stripped of his garments. I mean, Jesus just really sets the table smartly. If this man could identify him as a Jew, would the priest probably help him? Absolutely. Yeah. So again, we're leaving the neighbor question open for debate and discussion because we're stripping the man of identity. The priest does not know if this was a Jewish guy. And rather than get unclean with someone that is not worthy because he's not Jewish, he decides to pass by the other side. The next one is a Levite. What's the difference between a Levite and a priest? So were priests.
Were they, like the guardians or the master at arms of the temple?
Yeah, you're getting there. Yeah, John's right. I mean, I would guess you would term them as the altar guild. They would take care of the altar guild and the custodians. So they would clean up the tabernacles or the temple. They would clean up the sacrifices and get things prepared. The Levites were not the ones that were leading the services, officiating the services, but they were helping to prepare the services for the priests to lead. Priests and Levites both came from the tribe of Levi. John, did you have something?
Yeah, weren't they, in the Old Testament, also in charge of carrying the
Tabernacle.
tabernacle?
Yeah, they were. And out of all the tribes, what was one unique thing God didn't give these people? He didn't give them land. Because he wanted the Levites to live among all the people of Israel. Because if you got land, then you got to kind of stay in your geographical spot. God wanted a priesthood to be dispersed among all his people throughout the entire land. So the Levites lived throughout the area. And this Levite too lived in Jericho. So he goes and he's in the same predicament. He can't tell whether or not this guy is a Jewish guy. Doesn't necessarily want to get unclean. Now, Jesus introduces a Samaritan. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. So the Samaritan reverses the actions of the robbers. The robbers do not take pity on him, they give him cruelty. The Samaritan's first response is an emotional one of pity. And instead of stripping him and hurting him, the Samaritan goes to him, bandages his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his donkey, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. So between the priest and Levite, which one of the two probably would have been writing like the Samaritan was writing? Which of the two really could have put this guy on a donkey? Which one had the means? The priest would. He's the elite class of the Levites. So the priest has got the donkey, and he won't even put the guy on a donkey to get care. What did he do in the end with his ride? What did the Samaritan do? Did he ride the donkey into the village, or did he do something? What did he do? He put the man on his donkey, brought it to an inn, took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii. 2 denarii. A denarii is one denarii is a day's wages. So instead of stealing from the man, again, you see the reverse happening in this parable. That's why it's kind of easy to remember parables when you look at how the things just move from one to another. You know, stripped, the guy comes in, bandages him, takes money, guy gives him money to stay. You could kind of almost memorize this when you look at how Jesus puts this together. He gives them 2 denarii to the innkeeper. That should at least take maybe, I don't know how many days for in a denarii is 1 day's wage. Look after him, he said, and when I return, I'll reimburse you for any extra expense you may have. Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers? Of the 3, which one? Samaritan. So if we were to look at this allegorically, who do you think the Good Samaritan represents? Or Jesus seems to be the Good Samaritan in the parable.
He pays the price.
He pays the price. Right on the donkey in Palm Sunday, yeah. You can put a connection with that as well. So I get back to the question, though. Does Jesus answer the guy's question?
Not the rest.
How does this parable, in your mind, answer the guy's question? The guy wants to know, who is my neighbor?
Well, it transcends ethnicity.
So it does transcend ethnicity. That not by any race should we determine who our neighbor is. But our neighbor is anyone who is in need. Doesn't matter if they're Samaritan or Jewish. You know, this Samaritan comes upon this guy because he's in need. That's what our neighbor is. Any thoughts on how that applies in your life? Do we sometimes struggle and do we walk by people that are people in need and do we sometimes behave like priests and Levites? Yeah, yeah. Why do we act like priests and Levites when we see neighbors, when we see someone in need? Why?
I think people these days want to mind their own business because
MYOB, mind your own
I've been
business.
told that a lot.
You've been told that a lot.
Mind your own business. It takes time. People don't have a whole lot of time. Some people could be scared.
There's fear, you know, you think of the fear, usually they'll use this parable to talk about what you should do with a hitchhiker. Yeah, is that hitchhiker in need?
As long as they're not bleeding, like, they're okay.
Yeah, roll down your window, about 50 feet away, you okay? Yeah, I'm fine, all right. I mean, there comes a point in time where you have to, consider your safety. Why would this Samaritan be able to do this act and not have to worry about safety? He's about dead. He can't do anything to hurt him. So he's got no fear about that. The only fear that these other two guys had was just uncleanliness and what it would do from time. I think
Samaritan was very trusting with the innkeeper too. The innkeeper could have taken it come back to you with 5 more denarii.
or the innkeeper also could have said, it's going to be more than 2 denarii. Why don't you upfront me now? So there is that in that play in that story. But I think a lot of times I don't want to get involved. Time, Go ahead, Donna.
On 77th, I have seen a gentleman in the aisle with a sign, 3 meals. Meals, 3 meals.
We want some money.
All right, so you've given him a meal? Have you tried that?
No, because I don't exactly know what to do. It was,
Well, some of these guys that say they want meals, I know in Chicago, our son Micah ran into that too. He was a little naive. He gets out and in Chicago, he's visiting with some friends and, hungry, want a meal. So they go in and they buy him a Happy Meal, whatever, at McDonald's. They give it to him, he throws it away. He wants money, So it's really hard to know for sure if they are needy. That's the other thing which keeps us away from helping is, are they pulling our leg? Are they scamming us?
Well, you hear about the people in Vegas that are making 6 figures by just sitting there
Begging.
and being homeless.
Yeah.
They make a lot of money.
Well, in Chicago, I heard a lot of that too, that they're making a lot of money, and you know what? It's also tax-free.
Exactly.
They're not even taxed on it.
So it's hard to trust who actually needs it. So you kind of, what I try to do is just sort of try to feel it. If I'm in McDonald's and I'm also have this feeling, she's the person behind you. Okay.
Can I be behind you next time, Vicky?
The line, you get that feeling. Or I've been with homeless people where you get the feeling.
That's the right thing to do.
Now I don't get that feeling at all.
Yeah. No, I totally understand. I get that same thing that person's really needed. It's like an angel tells you, hey, we need to do something. Joanne?
Ask when we don't get out much, but we get half a dozen phone calls, we get a half a dozen stuff in the mail that wanting to help.
Yeah.
Their Everybody wants help.
Everybody wants help. And you've got to use your wisdom and judgment of where the Lord leads you, because you only have so many resources. Because if you give all your resources, then you're going to be needy, right?
When my husband was alive, we were at Safeway, which isn't here anymore. But anyway, there was a man, and he came, and he says, I need gas. He said, I need gas because he says, I ran out and we still have a little way to go. Well, my husband thought about it for a minute, and he thought about it. He says, okay. So at that time, I think he gave him like $5, which at that time would have been
Yeah.
But anyway, after he gave him the money, he started questioning himself. And he said, I'm gonna go over here and see if that guy, because there's a service station across the road. He said, I'm gonna go and see if that man is using that for that.
Right.
And I don't remember whether or not he did or not, but my thing is, if we give for a reason, it's good on our behalf. They're the ones who's gonna be judged if they don't use it for the reason that we give it. So why should it bother us one way or another?
Yeah. Well, it should only bother you if you are giving money to enable them in a bad dysfunctional behavior.
I've had that happen with the gas, and I've actually said, look, I'll go to the gas station with you, and I'll fill up your car, or I'll fill up your gas can. And they have flatly refused to do that.
Right, because some of these, unfortunately, some of these are using this, give me 5 and they get another 5 for somebody else, another 5 for somebody else, buy drugs. They're going to buy drugs and alcohol with it. And so that's where you're not helping your neighbor. You're enabling dysfunctional behavior.
You know, in Lufkin, Texas, where I used to live, there was no reason for anybody to be out on the street. There was always somewhere, a place for them to go.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, we took, that person came into the church and we said, okay, a lot of times they wanted to go before the congregation and ask for
Wow.
no happen. But wait for the pastor, and they talk to the pastor, and the pastor, well, we know a place we can put you up,
Right, I do, yeah, same situation.
you know, and a lot of times they would flatly refuse because
Right.
they had a wife, a live-in, and they wanted to stay with them, and they won't let them do that.
Yeah.
So they would rather stay out on the street.
Yeah, well, maybe they have a place, but they're not telling you. How many churches do you think are in Waxahachie within a 10-mile radius of this place? A bunch. So if you have a panhandler come to your church and ask for $20 and he goes to all the other churches, how many does he walk away with in a day? Money. And tomorrow he goes to another town. I think that's what we kind of stopped here at Waxahachie now, to the fact of centralizing it through the police station. And it's just odd, you know, that when people call the office or they come in and say that, can you give me some gas money? He says, yeah, we're all set up. I mean, go to Waxahachie Police Station. Here's the number, here's the address, you know. They've got HEB gift cards. They're going to give you $40 either for gas or for food, get you on your way to the next town. And it's like, I'm not going to no police station. I'm like, and they almost like, they think that they deserve it, that they're entitled to this. And I'm like, I'm not giving you cash. I said, we have a plan in play. If you're really needing gas and you're needing food, we take care of you. Go over there. Why do you think some of these people don't want to go to the police station? They're wanted. And this is one thing that I think is really good with the police station. Two things about the police station: it's a 24/7. So anytime, any time of the day, they can go over there anytime. If they really truly are needy, if they're down, being stripped of their stuff, we have ability to take care of them. You can go to that police station 24/7. The other thing too, it also makes them accountable. Accountable. And I think that is part of our Christian responsibility. We are to make our neighbor accountable.
That's a good example of being a neighbor. At HEB, I was there to pick up my prescriptions. And there was a young couple in front of me, and then there was an older man at the counter getting his prescriptions, and he was having trouble, hearing to begin with, and then he kept saying, oh, that's so much. And this young couple behind me, she went up and she picked up the price of his prescription.
That's nice. Because he's not really begging, but the need was expressed.
He kept saying, oh, no, you don't have to do that.
Yeah.
But she said, I want to do
Yeah.
that. I want to do
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, yeah. And that's good because of the fact the need was just inadvertently expressed. She's not really having a handout. She hears and she's moved by the
Yeah.
Spirit to say, I want to take care of that for you.
Yeah, I just thought that was, for a young
Yeah,
person.
right. Yeah. Any other thoughts on the Good Samaritan that you have asked or thought or comments or have learned from this? Because it's a parable that we've heard over and over and over again to actually try and keep us on track of understanding our neighbors, anyone in need, and two, we have a responsibility of accountability as well in meeting those needs. You just can't enable these people to continue with their dysfunctional behavior. And you can only have so many resources before you're the one that's in need. So it's hard, like Joanne was saying. I know that you get that. You get in the mail, you get everybody soliciting money. And they're all good causes. They're all needy causes. But you just can't find your way giving to everybody. So,
One thing I've learned you can do is when you're downtown and there's a panhandler there, what you can do, I bring a frozen bottle of water and give it to them.
yeah. I should appreciate that. Yeah. Yeah, I kind of baptized myself this morning. I'm glad I dried up before I got in front of the preaching today. I mean, my water bottle was frozen, and I opened it up a little bit, and lo and behold, it exploded on me, and I had water all over my arm. And I'm like, oh my goodness, I hope that I just stay here. I'm going to be behind the altar for a little while, but when I preach, I hope it looks dry, because it's not, people are going to like, what in the world did he do? And I'm like, oh. So, yeah.
Nice cold bath.
Your cold bath. Okay, we'll look at one last more thing here. We'll finish out Luke chapter 10 at the home of Martha and Mary. What two reasons will some argue that Martha and Mary listed here are not the same Mary and Martha in John 11? So Jesus and his disciples were on their way. He came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to him. She had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he said. But Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. She came to him and asked, Lord, why don't you care that my sister has left me to do work by myself? Tell her to help me. Martha, Martha, the Lord answered, you are worried and upset about many things, but few things are needed, or indeed only ones. Mary has chosen what is better and will not be taken away from her. A couple things of why people are saying this is not the same Mary, Martha in John chapter 11. First of all, there's no mention of the brother in Luke chapter 10. Mention of a sister, and you would hope that if they're going to tie these stories together, they would bring Lazarus into the story here so that you as a reader would make that conjunction. But Lazarus is not introduced as their brother. Two, the village where they live is not identified. In John chapter 11, the village is outside of Bethany. It's identified. So people come to say that Mary and Martha here are not the same Mary and Martha in John chapter 11, and that can be possible because what is it about these names back in the biblical times, Mary and Martha? Very common. A lot of people got them. Craig?
I would say that, like, when I'm listing my children, I list all this first. Usually Martha, then it was Mary, and the other way Jesus was Mary and Martha.
Right. Yeah, Martha seems to be, I think, the oldest, right? Not really sure here. It just says.
It doesn't say, but
Yeah.
normally that's what people do.
Yeah.
That's what I do.
Right.
This oldest first.
Yeah. So if you were to look at this as an Aesop fable, you guys remember Aesop fables?
Yeah.
What's the moral of the story? What's the moral of the story? What's the moral of the story here for Luke?
Pay attention to what's important.
So what is Luke saying is important? What is Jesus saying is important?
Yeah.
Yeah. My vicarage supervising pastor, he had courage. More courage than me. I couldn't do it. I had the same thing happen to me. I was like, I got to do what Gherkin did. Couldn't do it. over the 31 years. He did it. He just did it. This family invited him over for dinner on a Sunday, for a Sunday dinner. And the family didn't show up for church. So what do you think he did about the dinner? He didn't show up for dinner. They called him, kind of upset. He said, well, I think you missed what's most important today, and I don't want to be responsible for that. Well, man, I had opportunities to do that because I've had the same thing. Since I've invited, and they're not there in church, and oh, the gherkin thing comes back to my head. Should I do the gherkin thing? You know? So you're like, which way is going to be the least offensive? Which way is going to be most instructive? So this is the same thing going on here with Jesus. You got Mary in church and Martha not in church preparing the meal. Jesus comes to serve, not to be served. Do we have this problem sometimes in our community as a Christian community and in the church itself? You know, do we sometimes worry about putting on so much things at the church that we forget to go to church? You know, you sit there and you wonder sometimes, the kitchen is a great thing, but when it involves people in that kitchen, when church is going on, when they haven't gone to church, you got to scratch your head. Are we as a church doing the right job? We got 2 services, so you can alternate at that, but you get a situation where sometimes people will go not to church, but to the kitchen and never to church. Pastors have to sometimes scratch their heads and say, should I say something here? You know? One of the things that Martha's upset with is what? She's doing it all by herself. She's burned out. So she's also lacking joy in her service. So if that ever comes to the point when you lack joy, maybe it's time to look for something else. Not quit the church, but quit the task. Sometimes I've had some over the years, people say, I want to do this, I want to do that. I mean, it's like they'll do anything and everything. And I'll have to pull them aside and say, look, you know, you need to step away, because I do not feel as a pastor that I'm doing you a favor by leading you to burnout. So if you ever hear from me, you know, maybe you need to take a break from the office or from that, it's not because I don't like you, it's because I do like you. I want you not to be burned out. I want you to go. How many, you know, in the Old Testament, how many years did God say you could work the land? And then you had to give the year off, a whole year off. And, you know, if you have to rejuvenate the land, just think about the whole thing with the human body. It's good to change it up in the church so that you don't get burned out. You don't become a Martha and get frustrated with people because they're not helping anymore. One of the other aspects that you look at this Mary Martha story is Martha disagrees with Mary on what truly is important, and Jesus backs up Mary. This thing is just, I mean, this story is something to keep in mind as we look at service to the church, that service to the church should not take away service to the Lord. Understand the difference. Service to the church should not take away service to the Lord, because the church is an institution. The Lord is a being. And this happens a lot in the ministry, that Martin Luther said that there are 3 things to keep in proper order. First thing is service to God. Second thing is service to family. Third thing is service to your neighbor. You know, you're serving your neighbor through your family as well, but God, neighbor, God, family, neighbor. Pastors sometimes struggle with the idea that they equate God with the institution. that they got to go to this church, they got to go to those meetings, they got to go get this task done, they got to do that. And then you see them guys getting burned out because they're loving an institution, but they're not loving the Lord. Are you following this? Yeah. And so when you see that happening in a pastor's life, and I've been trying to be very guarded to my years of serving, that I don't love the institution more, it's God, family, vocation. That's what I'm sorry. Love God, family, and vocation. That's the order. God, family, vocation. I did challenge my father on that aspect just before his retirement. And I said, Dad, I think sometimes you got that messed up. I think you thought God and vocation were on the same because you're the pastor, so that you had to treat your church as you treated the church equal with God. The church is an institution. You serve God, your family, then your vocation. You got that messed up. But Dad kind of said, in response, I think I've shared this story with you, that after serving 25 years, the church becomes your family. And I get that after being 30-some years up at Indiana. You start doing that, and you can create a problem where you lose that distinction. But that's got to stay.
Pastor, that's in any job.
It is.
You intend to put your job first, and then get burned out, and
Right.
there's reasons that you then put the Lord second.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
it's so important.
Right. For example, the pastor has a board of elders meeting, and his son has got a Little League baseball game the same night. How many years does your son Little League? That goes really years past. So where should the pastor maybe be present? Should he be in the institution of the elders meeting, or should he say, tonight I want to go attend my son's Little League game? I mean, these are the questions that the church and pastor have to work out. Elders in the church, if they really care, they got to make sure that pastor keeps that distinction for the sake of the church, for the sake of his family. So, pastor, you need to be at that Little League game.
We have the elders meeting there.
Or elders meeting, or you move it. What we ended up in Indiana when our kids were that young, we just moved the meeting later. So they got a meeting, can we move it later? And we did. So we were able to do both. And the elders were like, because I came in single, and my elders, when I was there, were family people. So they would say, I'm not going to make the elders meeting, so Pastor, I'm going to be at my son's Little League game. And so then when it was my turn with Little League, they gave me the same courtesy. And that was just how we worked. We respected family time.
We do the same thing here, we just didn't have a meeting.
Yeah, I'm not saying this is a place that's ever been challenged because my family's all raised, so I don't have necessarily the conflict. But I do remember it was a Lenten season, I'm going to end this with this story. Our oldest son was on the varsity basketball team, and they were in a sectionals tournament. And of all the times, it was during the season of Lent, and it was on Wednesday night. You got church Wednesday night. So I'm like, okay, this is God's service. I'm going to do this service. And I'm doing Lenten service about the normal time for 45 minutes. But there's a lot of people that want to watch KV basketball because Indiana, Hoosier State, they want to go. And they know that Pastor Son's on the floor. And I'm looking as I'm preaching the sermon, and you know what these people are looking at when I'm trying to communicate to them? They're looking at their watches. And I had about 4 or 5 people chastise me. Why did you go so long? You need to be over at that stadium cheering on your son. So we got there about halfway through the first quarter. And that's why I said I was really concerned about it. We made it work. But it was just kind of interesting to have that response from the congregation saying I was in the wrong spot. Hey, they won the game. They actually won sectionals that year too. They went on to regionals, so it was a good season for them.
The company that my daughter works for, when they're there 7 years, they get a month off sabbatical.
That's wonderful.
So, to refresh themselves.
Yeah. It needs to be done. The 7-day thing is important. I mean, the 7 year with the land, 7 days for rest. During the.
I don't know if it's because of somebody that started the company that was a Christian attitude, 7 days and 7 years.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it works. Well, let's close with prayer. Father, O Lord, we ask for your blessings as we seek to serve our neighbor, the ones around us in need. Help us, O Lord, to discern how and when to serve them and how best to do it. Enable us, O Lord, also to keep things in proper perspective of service to you, family, and vocation, all in proper order, so that we do not do a disservice to you or to our family when we unfortunately make the vocation our God. We ask for your blessings in our growth in Christ and in our growth in Christian relationships. In the name of Jesus, amen.